Hello, we are Dressing Alice, and today we're going to sew our Mila dress pattern. We'd love if you'd sew along with us. Let's get started. What you want to do first is print your pattern on standard A4 or US letter paper. You're going to tape together according to your pattern layout and cut around the big black border. Once you've done that, cut your individual pattern pieces out, place it on your fabric, and cut out your fabric. Next, we're going to sew the front and the back bodice together. You want to place them right side together, and you're going to sew the shoulder side seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Repeat the same steps for your lining. Once you've sewn the shoulder seams, you want to iron them flat. Take your back band, you want to iron it in half, wrong sides together. Insert the elastic into the band so it's up against the fold and one edge. Pin this to keep it secure. Now it's time to add the elastic in before we sew our lining to our bodice pieces. You want to pin the side of the band with the elastic to the bottom edge of one of your back pieces. You want to make sure that the raw edge is facing down so you're not sewing it upside down by accident. Lay your bodice lining on top of your bodice, right side together, and pin. Now it's time to sew them together. You want to sew them at the armholes, the neckline, and the back with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and double check that you're sewing it right side together. Don't forget to leave about a 2-inch gap unsewn. This is so that we can add the back band and the elastic into it so it will mirror the other side. Alrighty, now it's time to snip off the points of your ties and then give the curves a couple of 1/8 inch snips. That way, when you turn it around the right way out, it's not bulky and it will iron flatter and just look a lot nicer. All right, turn your bodice right side out by pulling the back through the shoulder. This is a lot harder on the smaller sizes than it is the larger. Bear with it. You haven't done it incorrectly. It's just a bit tricky to get through the shoulder seam. You're going to iron your bodice flat. I like to continue ironing where we left that 2-inch gap. It seems to make it a lot easier in the next step if it follows the same line. Pin your elastic so that the edge matches up with the remaining end of the back band. It will look a bit funky, just make sure it's up as close to the fold and that remaining edge as possible. Sew the elastic down to secure so it's much easier in the next step. Alright, this is where it gets tricky. You want to turn this side of the back bodice without the elastic, wrong side out, as far up as you can. You're going to insert the back band into the part of the back bodice you left unsewn. It should be sandwiched between the back bodice and the lining, right side together. You're going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, right side together. So you're virtually pretending you're sewing the entire bodice together. You've just sandwiched some elastic in there. You're going to finish securing the elastic by sewing a line 3/8 of an inch from the bottom at the back band. Whilst you're sewing, stretch the elastic so that the fabric is flat and you don't sew any folds by accident. It's also a lot easier when you stretch the fabric that you don't accidentally sew over your elastic. We've almost finished the bodice now. What you want to do is separate your main bodice and your lining at the side seams, and then you want to pin right side together. You want to sew these side seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, right side together. Just double check that you're sewing the front lining to the back lining and the front main bodice to the back main bodice at the side seams. Alrighty then, for the finishing touches of the bodice, you want to top stitch the edges of the armhole, neckline, and the back. Moving on to the skirt now, we want to take out the front and the back skirt. We're going to place them right side together and sew the side seams of your skirts with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once sewn, it's time to finish your seams. You can use an overlock or a zigzag stitch. You can choose to hem now or at the end. I like to do it now before we add in the ruffle, as it's just a flat square and it's much easier to measure. So what you're going to do, you're going to take out your ruler and draw 2 lines, a 1/4 inch and 1 inch from the bottom edge of the skirt. Iron a fold at each line toward the back. You're going to pin down and then sew to hem the bottom of the skirt. Now it's time to gather your skirt. You want to set your machine to its longest stitch length. And then what you're going to do is sew 2 lines, 3/8 of an inch from the top of your skirt, and then another line in between the raw edge and the line that you just sewed. Make sure that you leave long tails of thread so we can pull it together in the next step. You want to turn your bodice right side out and make sure your skirt is inside out. You're going to insert your bodice into your skirt. You want to match the notches of the front to the skirt and the notches at the back band. If you've forgotten to cut any notches, you can find the middle just by folding in half. Then you want to pin the side seams together. Once you've pinned, you want to gather the thread. You gather the thread by pulling the long tails of thread. Sometimes they do snap. Use it gently as you can. Now you've gathered your skirt and it fits the bodice perfectly, it's time to pin down. I go a little bit overboard with the pins. I find the foot of my machine, it does tend to move it around a bit, and then I have to whip out my best mate, the seam ripper, and start again. You're going to sew this waist seam with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once you've done that, you can finish your seams with an overlocker or a simple zigzag stitch. Now, we love a chat, so if you get stuck, please don't hesitate to reach out to us on Etsy. Thanks for sewing along with us. Cheers.